pleasure to be a moderator for this panel. So this panel will address the role of GARN in the rights of nature movement, the ways in which GARN has worked and contributed, and what the future might hold for GARN as part of the growing rights of nature movement. And for this panel, we have inspirational leaders who have worked with rights of nature for many years and who are also part of GARN's executive committee. So we're going to start with Tom Goldtooth. He's the executive director of the Indigenous Environmental Network in the United States, which is an international indigenous NGO based in Bemidji, Minnesota, near the border of the United States and Canada. And for over 36 years, Tom has been an amazing social change maker within the Native American community. Tom.
Thank you, Hana. How mitakia pi. We say that back home when we start a presentation, and we say that at conclusion. How mitakia pi recognizes you as a relative. But a lot of people do not know when a speaker from my Dakota people says mitakia wasi, which is a version of how mitakia pi. Putting P at the end is the plural. You all are my relatives. But it's also to recognize the unseen. It's to recognize life, even the rock. Maybe a rock is sitting there. Maybe there's the trees, grass, animals, even a bird that's listening. So when one says how mitakia pi, it recognizes all of life, that we are related. So I want to say hello to all my brothers and sisters. I'm going to be really brief because I know our sister here has a sign that she says 0, that I have to cut it off. It was good to recognize all the articulation earlier. I will not repeat that. And the question on the role of the Global Alliance on Rights of Nature is what we've been asked to speak to. And the role of this alliance in the rights of nature movement. I was taking some notes of some of my articulation of what that should be. Those of you that know me, one of the important aspects of creating change, whether it's environmental protection issues, indigenous rights issues, is that we have to be involved with creating action. We have to be involved with creating a movement for change. So I was saying that GARN has a role in this network that is created since September 2010, when GARN was created. A lot from lawyers, economists, academia, organizations to create collaboration, to be a hub for connecting relationships and exchange of knowledge around diversity now existing in 100 countries, and with the mission to encourage the recognition and effective implementation of rights of nature, creating a system of jurisprudence that treats nature as a fundamental rights-bearing entity, not mere property to be exploited. So I wrote that down. That's on this webpage. So how do we deepen that engagement? That's a role that I feel that we have. I'm on the executive committee of GARN. So the role is deepening the articulation engagement with the grassroots of the world, with the movements in every region of the world. And we have to create that engagement to be articulate and critical in this political moment of struggle that we're in. Not only in the South, but in the North, in the West, and the East. Small island states, very important. Africa, the polar regions that are melting, and involving all people, especially those involved in struggle. That's a role of GARN as part of this movement. And the need to develop popular education, a role to bring all this great information. Rights of nature is not a theory. It's not a theory as articulated by our brothers and sisters, indigenous peoples. But how do we develop popular education, the approaches and materials and training in many languages? And understanding these concepts of right in nature, rights of Mother Earth, harmony with nature, there's already different concepts. So with that understanding is linking the issues and the root causes as what was articulated in Cochabamba, what was it, 2010? In April. The root cause of a lot of the issues that we are facing, including climate, is capitalism. So part of understanding the rights of nature and being part of a movement that's embracing this is to also educate, inform around the issues of capitalism, economics and trade, militarization, energy, policy, and the role of GARN is to broaden what is the we. What is the we? I see a lot of folks here that are part of this we, but we haven't defined that. You say, can I be part of your alliance? And what's the process and the protocol for that? So that's a role of our alliance here, is to create that entry point of bringing this movement into other movements, social movements, indigenous movements, peasants and small farmers, women, youth movements. And respecting community. One of the points made by one of our sisters is that we have some of our own reflections and ways of expressing rights of nature. Maybe it's folded into the struggle that we are working on. How do we recognize that? And how do we support you as community? And the methodology as far as giving power to our communities to reclaim democracy and dignity. Those were some of the key components I wrote down. And woven into that role is some of these challenges, and challenges that indigenous peoples that we have brought to this table with the Global Alliance on Rights of Nature is understanding the concepts and problems of dominion. Dominion. We have to challenge that concept. It's been woven into the psyche, the mentality of society. Dominion over Mother Earth, dominion over our women. Dominion. And stewardship is a form of dominion. So what is our articulation of addressing that issue and the challenges with understanding the spirituality that we express? It's very important. It's challenging for society that has been systematically removed from understanding their face of reality. In Europe, what happened to the woman of the lake? What happened to those tribal people that understood? Why were they destroyed and their belief system completely erased from history? This is deep. So part of the role of GARN is to understand that this is a life and death issue that we are facing. Not a theory, it's not fluff. This is a real issue. And to continue the tribunals, to further develop these tribunals, not only in the South, but in the North. And how do we continue to have these tribunals with cases to identify the perpetrators of the crime? And not only the perpetrators, but the accessories to the crime and the accomplice. One of the things we articulated in the past 2 tribunals that we had with this Global Alliance was to weave in the issues of property rights, ownership of the sacred, the elements of carbon, for an example, reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation, red. A lot of the communities don't know the money comes from the polluting industry. It's a property right issue. In order to trade, it's a property right issue. Our communities don't know that. So how do we reconcile participation in these systems to where we could become an accomplice or accessory to a crime against the Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth? So how do we challenge this and address the issues mentioned earlier, ecocide, terroricide, and the violations of the territorial integrity of Mother Earth? So we have to play a role in GARN, part of this movement, in helping all of us to recognize our face, our relationship to the sacredness of the female creative principle of Mother Earth and Father Sky, the principles of creation. Our fight for survival as indigenous people is your fight for survival. Please don't just put it on the shoulders of indigenous peoples. It's your responsibility. It's part of your duties and obligations as humanity to fight for the rights of future generations. We are having ceremony for you. Many people are having ceremony to try to put things in balance. Some of us get sick when we have ceremony to maintain this balance that we talk about, harmony from nature. We need the help, and Global Alliance on Rights of Nature can be a part of that, articulating that throughout the world with these movements to all have that responsibility. Thank you. Ritaki Owasi.
Thank you so much, Tom. And it's really true, the responsibilities on everyone to fight for rights of nature and future generations. We're gonna move on with Osprey Orielle, who's going to talk about the tribunals. She's the founder and executive director of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network in the United States. She works nationally, internationally with grassroots and indigenous leaders, policymakers, and scientists to mobilize women for climate justice, resilient communities, systemic change, and a just transition to a clean energy future. Welcome, Osprey.
People gonna rise like the water, we're gonna calm this crisis down. I hear the voice of my great-granddaughter saying rights of nature now. People gonna rise like the water, we're gonna calm this crisis down. I hear the voice of my great-granddaughter saying rights of nature now. You are all a part of this movement. We wouldn't be doing this without you, so thank you for listening all day, but know that you are in our hearts and minds, speaking through us too with your reflections. I want to talk about the main work of GARN these past years, which has been the International Rights of Nature Tribunals that Tom was referring to. These tribunals have been really productive and inspiring and are providing awareness building, education, and helping to spotlight struggles on the ground as we work to visibilize our grassroots efforts. The tribunals have also helped us grow our movement. A lot of the reason we're sitting here is because of these tribunals. Given the dominant power structures of today, it would not be prudent to think that the changes we want to have happen are going to happen without assertion. So a real component of the struggle for ecological, social, racial, and economic justice, as well as cultural transformation in terms of the spiritual piece, is in fact in the streets, in the schools, in the fields, in the forests, in the marketplace, and in the halls of decision makers. True transformative policies are only going to change when we have strong social movements pushing for them. So one way that GARN is movement building and working towards systemic change and demonstrating rights of nature in action, and how would it work to actually implement rights of nature in our communities, is through the International Rights of Nature Tribunals. They're providing a vehicle for reframing prominent environmental and social injustices. The GARN Tribunal has its origin, I guess not surprisingly and very beautifully, here in Ecuador. The first International Rights of Nature Tribunal happened in Quito in January 2014. And as many of you know, and I think a lot of the people from the Global South talking today demonstrate that in the Global South there is a strong history of people's tribunals, and we have a lot to learn from them. They have really empowered grassroots movements worldwide, so it makes sense that the first tribunal actually happened here in Ecuador, and Ecuador being the first country in the world to have rights of nature in their constitution. Since that tribunal, there have been 3 other tribunals. We were in Lima, Peru in 2014, Paris, France in 2015, and most recently in Bonn, Germany in November 2017. If that sounds familiar to you, those of you following the UN, you know that that is parallel to the UN climate negotiations, and that was done very much on purpose. We're doing these tribunals parallel to the climate talks to demonstrate an alternative path forward, not based on false solutions to climate change, such as increased natural gas extraction, megadams, geoengineering, and carbon trading schemes. The tribunals are intended to examine and make formal observations on rights violations that have remained outside the considerations of formal government institutions. The tribunals are also a way for us to experience and imagine together what would it actually look like if our courts of law were just and truly served people and planet. So just to give you a picture, we actually set up a formation of going into a room. There are case presenters, there are impacted persons giving testimony before audiences and judges, and then finally judges give report backs on violations to Mother Earth. While at the tribunals, we do focus on specific cases, we are also placing on trial in a very fundamental way our current legal and economic systems that legalize and monetize the destruction of nature. We are denouncing the dangerous idea of the commodification and financialization of nature. So we're really demonstrating, I think this is a key point, yes, very specific cases, but we need to understand that we're putting the legal system itself on trial because our legal system is not recognizing Mother Earth. In the tribunals, we demonstrate that rights of nature is a new yet ancient framework with its origins in indigenous knowledge about living in a respectful way with nature. And that we need to change our worldview to deeply understand that we are part and particle of Mother Earth. A central document for the tribunals, and much of our work, a document that has been mentioned several times today, is the Universal Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth, which was drafted at the World People's Conference on Climate Change and the Rights of Mother Earth in April 2010 in Bolivia. And a lot of input for that came from indigenous people. I want to share just a few examples of the cases that we've had so that you can see what we've been doing at the tribunals. We had climate crimes against nature, financialization of nature, GMOs, fracking, Amazon ecosystems, international trade deals. So there's been a host of issues we've talked about to demonstrate these violations against Pachamama. We have addressed these issues as well as cases for defenders of the land. And I think this is really important to highlight this, that there have been very few international forums for defenders of the land to be heard. People who, risk their lives, every day protecting water, forests, and their lands. We recognize that land defenders and water protectors face grave threats due to their work that is in fact protecting vital systems for all of us. And I think that we really need to understand how many, let's face this, indigenous, brown, and black bodies are on the line, and the privilege that many of us have, and how we need to look at our own risks in the real confrontations that are going on the ground. The organization Global Witness reports that the attacks and murders of those protecting land rights and environment have soared dramatically these past years. In 2017, more than 185 land defenders and environmental activists were killed. 48% of those were indigenous peoples. Failure to recognize and respect indigenous rights and a widespread sense of impunity are said to drive most of these killings. So it's essential in these tribunals to expose the threats and to stand up and speak out for frontline defenders. The tribunals are also intended to increase public awareness of the ways in which fundamental flaws in our legal and economic systems negatively impact the natural world and people. In the case of global warming, the urgency and existential nature of the crisis is demanding system change. I think we realize the systems we're working in are not going to solve the climate crisis. As many of you know, a central discussion in quote-unquote solving the climate crisis is through market mechanisms, through the buying and selling of the right to pollute the atmosphere through schemes like carbon trading. We are asking, does it make any sense to try to protect nature and heal our damaged ecosystems by subjecting nature further to an economic and legal system that caused the damage in the first place? Think about it. How is this working out for us? The tribunals have been created to provide systemic rights of nature-based alternatives to the false solutions and failed negotiations of governing nation states. And while the tribunal judgment process does not have enforceable legal authority, the process does provide a catalyst for informed legal analysis of diverse cases and recommended mitigation based on rights of nature. And the tribunals have had some real-time impact in communities. As an example, in the case of Tipnis, which we've heard about today, which involves the protection of the Amazon rainforest and indigenous communities in Bolivia. We heard from our wonderful colleagues around the Tipnis case from Bolivia, and my colleague Shannon will be going into that in more depth in a moment. So there was a lot of significant renewed awareness and action generated nationwide because that was the case in our tribunal in Bonn. Because of all this, the tribunals are charting a new course and greatly strengthening public awareness of a rights of nature legal framework and the ability for communities to exercise their rights to stop environmental and social degradation and to offer real solutions to socio-ecological crises. Lastly, as the declaration for the symposium calls for, the declaration that Natty had handed out earlier, it calls for an international court on rights of nature. So an entirely international court based on rights of nature laws to punish the grave and systemic damage to Mother Earth and to put forth this vision of Earth jurisprudence that we're talking about today. And I think that the tribunals can continue to be a powerful model, already putting into practice what these international courts could look like. So I think this is something that we can look at as some of you can review a lot of the work we've done at the tribunals. A lot of the videos are online on our Rights of Nature website to get more of a sense of what we've done. So in closing, what I just want to say from my heart is what I love most about this work of Rights of Nature, the tribunal, the work of so many of our colleagues that have shared today, the fact of all of you being here in the room with us, is that our collective global work with Rights of Nature is helping humanity reconnect with the natural world, with Mother Earth. We've been very disconnected in our modern systems, and this, I think, has been a great tragedy. Underlying so many of the root causes of our destructive relationship with nature is our modern day belief and experience that we're actually separate from nature. This sense of disconnect from our living earth has proven to not only be spiritually heartbreaking, but a disaster in the human experiment. A culture, a people deprived of their connection to the sacred systems of life, to nature, is simply not viable. My great hope is that with the Rights of Nature movement, people of the world will listen to the leadership of Indigenous peoples who have carried the origins of rights of nature for thousands of years, and that we can change our laws and our worldviews to bring us home. Home, back to Mother Earth, to Pachamama, to ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Osprey. We're going to continue with Shannon Biggs, who is going to go deeper into the case of Tipnis that we had at the tribunal in Bonn. Shannon Biggs is the co-founder and executive director of Movement Rights, advancing legal rights for communities, indigenous peoples, and ecosystems. By working in California and with Native American tribes and allies nationally, Shannon also assists communities to ban harmful projects by passing binding laws that assert the rights of communities and nature over corporate projects.
Thank you. So many years ago, when the idea of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature was born out of a small gathering of people after Ecuador had put forward rights of nature in their constitution. I was fortunate to be one of the people in the room. I really would have had no idea that I'd be sitting here today when we talked about there should be a network to connect people as this work is beginning to grow around the world, and that there were people that we didn't even know who were advancing this work. They may be calling it something else, but we were all really, connected. How are we going to make these connections? And the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature was born out of that. And so all these many years later, to be back in Quito, at this particular moment, on the anniversary of celebration of such a monumental 10 years, and everything that has happened around the world and the advancement for this work globally is really an honor. When we started hosting the tribunals, we really were providing a space to step into the future of what the courts could look like if we began to ask the questions differently. If we began to ask, what kind of changes can we do? We began to ask different, instead of people, instead of asking corporations, what kind of, what's the least amount of damage you can do to create your product. We started asking the ecosystems. We started asking the rivers. We started asking the air, the water, the buffalo, and the butterfly, what kind of a world can we live in? What are the boundaries of those worlds? And what if we actually had a court that recognized the rights of ecosystems to have legal standing, to not only criticize, but really put on trial not just the corporations, not just the governments, but a system of law that treats the earth, the sacred earth, as property. And how do we begin to shift that? And our hope when we started with the tribunals was to be able to step inside that world, and maybe along the way that it would be something more than just theater, but really provide an opportunity to have impact on the ground. And last November in Bonn, Germany, among the cases that we heard from people like Cecilia Molinari from Tipnis, Bolivia, who presented the case, which she's talked about today, with great passion, as those of us who were on the judges' panel listened to the crimes and that this road would change the fundamental course of indigenous peoples who've been living there since all time. How could we continue to put forward work like a road that would wipe out an entire section of the Amazon forest, an entire groups of people who have been living in balance with the earth there and taking care of that part of the world and the biodiversity of that place. But it wasn't just that particular case or that particular struggle. We've heard from all around the world similar struggles. But she and the others who represented Tipnis looked at the judges and said, will you come? Will you come and see? Will you come and meet with the people? Will you come and visit and see Tipnis for yourselves? And that invitation really has changed so much, at least in terms of the future of what the Global Alliance and the Rights of Nature tribunals have to offer in terms of impact on the ground. At least we hope so. I was very fortunate to be asked to be one of 3 people on who actually went to Tipnis, along with Alberto Acosta, who needs no introduction, and Enrique Viale from Argentina, along with Hana Begovic, who coordinated all of our travel there. And we were able to spend 10 days on the ground listening to testimony of not just Cecilia, but hundreds of people from the Tipnis project about the history of the national park, the creation of the national park, the facts on the ground about how this road came to be an idea, and how the people of Bolivia understand that this road stands in the way of the people of Tipnis, the indigenous people, and the Amazon. And yet, the forces in terms of building this road, what does that look like? That was the job of the commission, to go and understand and speak with the people from Tipnis, to understand and speak with the general public, to understand and speak with the people who were advancing the idea of the road, including meeting with the ministers, including meeting with the government, and to hear all sides of the story. And our job as the commission, which we are in the process of doing, we've just come from that visit from Tipnis, and there's so much there to share, and I can't do justice to the impact in my 3 minutes left of time of what we learned there, what was shared with us. But our job as the commission was to really look not just to hear the hearts, but to look at the facts on the ground and put all of these things together. Because there is an opportunity, and certainly in Bolivia, our trip there was, it was almost like being on reality television. We were front page news in Bolivia every day that we were there. Alberto and Enrique, who speak Spanish, and I really don't, were conducting interviews. We were on the television. And this was an opportunity for this tribunal to have impact on the ground, because it wasn't really about us. It was about, why are you here? What are you doing here? What are you learning here? What is happening in Tipnis? What are the people of Tipnis, what are they saying? Oh, and by the way, we heard that you were held captive when you were visiting Polígono 7, the place where there are claims that there are bridges being built to execute the road from the Cocalera area through the Tipnis to the city of Cochabamba. And yes, we were stuck on a road for hours with no communication for many hours outside, where we had hoped, we went there with the hopes of having a dialogue with people who wanted to see the road built and understand their perspective. But instead, we were held captive for 6 hours in our cars on the road. And eventually, it wasn't about negotiating for a conversation. It was about negotiating for our ability to go home. So all of this is to say that the trip of Tipnis for the commission and for this case is something that is ongoing. We just have returned like 2 weeks ago from this trip, and the commission is, while we were here, gathering to forward our findings to the tribunal and to release that information in a report that the tribunal will release as a report. And that this may be the beginning of not just theater in terms of the tribunals, but what does it look like to be able to provide actual real support on the ground for communities who are defending the rights of Mother Earth. So for the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, and I'll tell you a secret, we're not a big organization. We're not just really well funded. group. This is a volunteer effort of many organizations who come with their own passion, their own time and energy around the world to devote to, to this issue. So we're here, we're growing and looking at how we can work with all of you and how we can implement and support what's happening on the ground of Bolivia as well. So that's our future.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for sharing all these experiences with us. We're going to continue with Maude Barlow, who will speak about how GARN will be moving forward and what is needed to spread our message. Maude Barlow is the honorary chairperson of the Council of Canadians in Ottawa, Canada, and chairs the board of Washington-based Food and Water Watch. In 2008-2009, she also served as senior advisor on water to the 63rd President of the United Nations General Assembly, and was also a leader in the campaign to have water recognized as a human right by the UN.
Gracias, Hana. Buenas tardes. So I'm just going to end this wonderful long day. Well, maybe we'll have a wee conversation, but I guess I'm the last speaker. Thanking you all. It's been an incredibly moving day. And I'm knocked out by who we are and more particularly who we're becoming. This is just me not getting too much sleep last night and the altitude. I'm just fine, but my voice isn't. Three things I want to say moving forward. The first is raised by both Pablo and Tom, and that is the need to clarify and educate about what we mean by the rights of nature. Sitting here today, it feels so much clearer to me, and I've been giving a lot of thought and writing to it, as we all have, but it's a growing movement. But I still meet people, I meet people from the right, of course, who dismiss it, but that doesn't worry me. I meet people who are on our side, who still think that it's a kind of elitist movement that cares more about nature than people. And it is just, this isn't who we are anymore, if we ever were. But I think it's very important that we put that forward and that we're very, very clear about who we are and the roots from which this is coming. And I particularly find this from the Global South. Indigenous and First Nations communities in my country, we tend to talk more from the United Nations, on the rights of Indigenous peoples, the Declaration. Bringing Indigenous rights and resource rights together. And as Pablo said this morning, sometimes those clash. It's not always as easy or as simple as you would want it. I did learn in my work on the human right to water and sanitation that we agitate the solitudes, those who were working on the environment and the science of the water crisis, and those who were working on the human rights and the poverty and the justice issues, and we had to put them together. Because you can't protect the environment if you're not working with the people who are living there. They live there, they exist there, and vice versa. You can't protect the local people if they don't have clean water and sanitation, and that to me is very much a model for us going ahead. The second thing I think we have to do is we have to put this vision and narrative that we've heard today up and against the dominant vision and narrative of our time. Called the Washington Consensus, it has been the way of looking at the world for most world leaders for 30 to 40 years now. Basically, they have promoted economic globalization, growth at all costs, privatization, deregulation, and free trade, unfettered by government regulation. And it has failed miserably. The UN talks about a precariat, the 3/4 of the world's working age population who do not have a decent job, any kind of security. And of course, we all know about the environmental devastation. So we really need to say there's a hole there. It has failed, and it's allowed the right-wing populist movements, from the Trumps to others in other parts of the world, to step in. And we have to be there to say, no, there's an alternative vision that doesn't blame the other and doesn't foment hate. And we're in a very particular and specific time now. I believe that there's a vacuum here, and if we step in, we will be there in a very important way. Part of that, however, is continuing to challenge those awful tools of theirs, like these trade agreements, like ISDS, the Investor State Development Dispute Systems, that allow foreign investors to challenge governments. We've been deeply affected by that in Canada. Environmental laws have been shot down. It is against the rights of nature that this country adopted over 10 years ago, to now find out that the government yesterday has moved away from its opposition to ISDS and is now going to move back to supporting foreign investors in an even more kind of startling way than it did. So these two things are not compatible, and we really need to know what they are, and we need to be moving and working with them. We have the right to good governance, and our movement for the rights of nature and people must be this antidote to this dying system. The third thought I'd like to leave you with is that we have to ground our movement and our work and our vision and our narrative in the politics of hope. Our movement is by its very nature a work of love and hope. Shannon talked about, you didn't say this, Shannon, but we punch above our weight. I mean, we really are a group of people and volunteers. I mean, a tremendous amount of volunteer work has gone into putting this event on here. And so we seem very powerful, but we will only be powerful as we grow and become more inclusive. Hope is a moral imperative for our work. It starts with the few and it branches out to the many. And I've lived long enough now that I have seen a sea change in the way we see things, from the women's movement to Black Lives Matter to the LGBTQ movement. We are seeing social change, and I believe we're on the cusp of a change where humans stop seeing each other as the overtakers, the overseers of nature and of the planet, and understand that we are all one, that nature is our relative, our other species are our relatives, and we are turning and truly listening to Indigenous peoples in a way those of us who are settlers have not done before. So I wanted to say that I'm very hopeful. There's a wonderful romantic poet called Gerard Manley Hopkins who said, there is a deep dearness down in nature. And what he meant was, if we stop hurting nature, if we protect nature, if we restore watersheds and we rebuild our forests and we rebuild our watersheds and we clear our soils, we will restore this beautiful planet with other species and with the help of Mother Earth. And I want to say that it's always, always, always too early to give up on a movement. And winning is not always on an individual campaign or an individual issue. Sometimes winning is just building a bigger movement. Yeah, you lost that case. We lost the Chevron case here. But what did we learn from it? What knowledge did we share? What new friends do we have? Did we have a good time together? Are we caring for each other? Are we sharing love with each other? Are we trusting each other? Are we building a movement? And this movement goes on beyond us. You know the old saying, you'll plant a tree even if you know you might not get to sit in the shade. We're planting a tree here. Our time has come. It really has come. And let's go out into the world with this narrative filled with hope and joy and love. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Irma, for those wise and beautiful words. I want to thank the panelists for sharing all these experiences and knowledge with us. We're going to open up the space for questions from the audience, and I just want to highlight here that we really need concrete questions, and we have volunteers. We're going to go around and
So, ¿por qué la Alianza Global solo tiene miembros de Estados Unidos y Canadá?
We're going to collect a few more questions, and we're going to gather and respond to all of them. Let's see here, we can add.
Muchísimas gracias por todo. Tom Goldtooth, Haumetaki Abi, did I say that right? My question is, beyond these incredible legal and social movements, me gustaría saber cuáles son los pasos que están trayendo los derechos de la naturaleza en nuestras escuelas, en educación. si no podemos cambiar las mentes de los adultos que son sin entendimiento, por lo menos podemos involucrar nuestra pasión y enfocarla a nuestros hijos. Gracias.
Gracias. Realmente no es una pregunta, sino más bien una aclaración. El Ecuador se ha caracterizado desde hace muchísimos años por tener un movimiento indígena, por tener un movimiento ambiental y un movimiento ecologista sumamente fuerte. No es coincidencia, por ejemplo, que aquí en el Ecuador se haya puesto un juicio contra Texaco. Bueno, tiene muchísimos hitos. Entonces, nos molesta un poco, estamos algunas personas molestas, cuando viene una persona de Estados Unidos, creo que se llama Mari, y dice que ella, no sé si tal vez fue el problema de la redacción, que ella vino a ayudar a escribir la Constitución en relación a los derechos de la naturaleza. Realmente, si nosotros vemos cómo están redactados los derechos de la naturaleza en el artículo 71, 72, 73 de la Constitución, tiene una marca profundamente ecuatoriana. Los derechos de la naturaleza escritos en la Constitución del Ecuador responden a todo ese gran movimiento indígena, a todo ese gran movimiento ambiental, a todo ese gran movimiento ecologista que tenemos. Entonces yo quisiera tal vez aclarar eso. No sé si sería un error de traducción, pero vemos muchas personas de aquí que estamos molestas por eso. Muchas gracias.
Sí, en función justo de uno de las cosas que compartieron, de cómo nos articulamos para traer movimientos dentro de este movimiento o para integrar, porque hay muchos movimientos que ya se están dando en todas partes. Y bueno, más allá de ir de los conceptos, aquí hay 100 personas que trabajan en derechos de la naturaleza en todo el mundo. Y cómo vamos más allá de solamente compartir conceptos y realmente trabajar en formas de articulación en pos de generar trabajos conjuntos, de integrarnos de alguna manera, cómo vamos a hacer agendas de trabajo colectivo y de que sea de una manera participativa, ¿no? Si hay este tipo de estrategias. Gracias.
Bueno, pues un poco fuera del ejercicio de la alianza global, pero tengo la curiosidad, la pregunta de la educación. Quería preguntarle al maestro Goldtooth si en su nación hay educación propia para los jóvenes nativos de su nación, y en esa educación se está pensando cómo hacer que los jóvenes nativos mantengan su identidad, porque en mi país y en muchas partes de Latinoamérica los jóvenes nativos de los pueblos originarios están viviendo en la ciudad, ya no quieren hablar su lengua, y esa esperanza que tenemos en la sabiduría de los pueblos se está perdiendo en las nuevas generaciones. Entonces quería saber si en Norteamérica, con la nación, ya están haciendo un ejercicio de educación con sus jóvenes de su pueblo.
It's really excellent questions. Just want to kind of bring a few of the questions together. One regarding the Executive Committee of the Global Alliance for Rights of Nature. It's just, that's who's sitting here because of how we distributed who was going to be on what panel. But it might be good if some of the other Executive Committee members stood up, and those who've been involved in the tribunals, you'll see that there's representation from the Global South, as well as Nima Bassi, who is our colleague who is from Africa, as you saw him in the thing, from Nigeria. And so Vandana Shiva, who you saw, who is from India, who's on the executive committee as well. So it just happened to be this panel. So just to be clear, there is international representation. And at the same time, we want to be very transparent that one of the reasons that we're here is also to work internally with our executive committee and with our close allies to deepen and broaden the movement. As has been stated, I think there's been a sense of like GARN being this really large body of people. It's the people actually putting together the tribunals, putting this event together are very small, and everyone is volunteering because we all have our own organizations, most of which are scrambling and small, and struggling for our own funding, let alone then volunteering hours and hours and hours to do something like this or put on the tribunal. So just to be clear, this is not like some big, U.S. well-funded, NGO that is hosting this. So we're also here to learn from you and your voices and to have this time to bring the North and South together. We specifically chose to have this event not in the global North, but here in the global South, to bring our sisters and brothers together, to bring forward the prophecy of the condor and eagle, and to bring this movement together. And it is messy and it's difficult and there are issues. And lastly, I'll say, I can understand the offense that was made. Our colleague is not here to speak for herself, so I really can't speak to that. But undoubtedly that the depth and breadth and the roots of rights of nature in Ecuador comes from here. And as we've all learned through many stories and people engaged, that in fact a lot of indigenous people had a great deal to do with a lot of the concepts like sumak kausai that came in hand with the rights of nature going into the Constitution. So I can't speak for my colleague, but just to say that it's really clear where the roots of the movement here come from. They left me working on the troubled waters. But I hope that answers some of your question. And also to the question of education, I think that's incredible. We really need to do that. That's one of the reasons we want to grow our movement, is that very few people know what rights of nature even is outside of our circles. So we do need to increase that, and we hope all of you will be participating in helping us to do that.
I wanted to address two questions. One was about First Nations in North America. I come from Canada, so it's different than from the United States. But we've seen a real resurgence of First Nations power and leadership. We've been fighting pipelines. A lot of Americans will know about the Keystone Pipeline, but there are in Canada pipelines that we've been fighting, and the leadership has come, the successful leadership in fighting those pipelines has come from Indigenous communities, and very much we're seeing the change in not only the leadership coming from there, but the recognition that the leadership is coming from there. And it's been in all my life of doing this kind of work, I have not seen the kind of friendship building, the kind of solidarity and trust that's been built. It's been wonderful. Quite the opposite in our country in terms of moving away from the language. It's been a rebirth of the language and the culture very much, as our government has apologized for very bad past wrongs. On the question on how to get the concept of the rights of nature out to others, sometimes you have to go to where they are. I certainly, again, speaking from my own experience, it's hard to get the rights of nature language in Canada for reasons. I think part of it is just that other concepts had come forward that people are kind of using, including the whole concept of public trust, which is that if we don't maintain parts of nature, certainly water in the case of what I work on, we don't maintain water as a public trust and under public management, we're going to lose it to private corporate control, for-profit control, and therefore we will not be able to protect either it or people's right to it. And so maintaining the public management of water is incredibly important. I see that as a huge piece of the rights of nature. It's maybe a step. Or talking about the commons. We talk a lot in our movements about the commons, what should not be allowed to be taken out of the common sphere. And so I think if introducing this language as being supportive of and not instead of work that people are already doing. And again, I talk about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, because that has come forward as a very sacred and important part of the justice movement for First Nations.
Yeah, in response to the gentleman here that asked me the question about what am I doing to bring this discussion concepts of rights of nature into our schools. We have a commitment, I personally have that commitment, our network of Indigenous peoples on environmental issues have that same commitment. is to work with the youth. We've always have brought the youth into our work, especially this new generation of youth. They're very familiar with these objects here. Sometimes they think they're smarter than me. When we bring up the concept, they're really looking it up. They're really looking it up. But the role of the elders is important because as elders we have the wisdom. And we're trying to bring that together into our school systems. And part of what we're doing in the North is that we're doing language revitalization, because it's true. In the North, the symptoms of colonization also has brought assimilation and acculturation along into our communities, along with the symptom of colonization of internalized oppression or lateral oppression that prevents our indigenous identity to be lifted up with pride. Our languages, even wearing one's hair long, is a statement of sovereignty and self-determination. So how are we doing this? We are working with the youth, introducing that worldview and that cosmology that's into the language. For an example, Unchimaka wichoni maku. Unchimaka wichoni maku means the Mother Earth, the Grandmother Earth gives me life. That's a way of translating that into the concepts. We don't have that specific concept of rights, but in our language we have the concept of our relationship to life and different objects. You know, we call objects, but we give life to that concept. And then we also include it in the revitalization of our food system, food sovereignty, our traditional seeds. And then also in the environmental work. When we first got involved with environmental work, we're not like a white environmental NGO group, because we approach this work from a spiritual orientation. It's spiritual work. So we have to carve in the concepts of this idea of what our relationship, responsibility, our duties and obligation to our own people, our ancestors, our future generation, through our culture, our heritage, our practices, and put that to life. So that's how we are working it into our school systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. We have time for 2 more questions.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. It's not so much a question as a statement which I hope will clarify. The formation of the Global Alliance was specifically a formation of an alliance, not an organization. And a lot of the thinking that went into it was, certainly in my case, informed by the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, where once the leading organizations had been banned and the leaders put in prison, it decimated the organization, and it took many years to rebuild. The way it was rebuilt was the United Democratic Front, where there were many organizations of very diverse, trades unions, civic organizations, sports clubs, that united around a few simple principles. It had to be non-racial, you had to be democratic, and you had to run your organization in that way. And through building a very broad-based alliance, we built powerful enough social organizations to change that country fundamentally and to overthrow apartheid. And it really was done primarily by the organizations inside the country rather than the exiles. Now, when we're talking about trying to bring about change of the magnitude that we're talking about here, we need a lot of people, we need them all over the world, and we need them to be able not to pull people out of the organizations where they're working in, because that's where their passions are, but we need, on occasions, to put all of those people working together towards the same goal. We need to be able to put thousands of people onto the street when it's necessary. So it does concern me a little bit, probably because we didn't explain this thinking in the session, is that there's this kind of view that there's this small group of people who are running this organization, The Alliance exists simply as a glue to enable many, many organizations around the world to work together when they need to work together around agreed objectives. So the membership of the Global Alliance, I forget the number, but it's 300 or 400, I think, organizations around the world, and very much around the world. We're talking about all the continents who believe in the same thing and work together. So when people say, for example, we would like more education, step forward. If you're in an education organization, you want to do that, join the Alliance and do it. The Alliance is about different organizations working together to build a movement that is powerful enough to push through the changes of the magnitude that we want. Thank you.
Un saludo con todas y con todos. Mi nombre es David Fajardo. Yo soy parte del colectivo Unidos. Y mi pregunta, y más bien es una sugerencia para todos y todas acá, y es que efectivamente creo que en este diálogo todas y todos estamos de acuerdo, casi la mayoría en cuanto a las concepciones teóricas de los derechos de la naturaleza, a toda esta construcción cognitiva y epistemológica de los derechos de la naturaleza, pero creo que es necesario que demos un pasito hacia lo práctico y hacia lo pragmático de los derechos de la naturaleza, porque no nos exige únicamente en estar pensándolo, sino que también trabajar sobre los derechos de la naturaleza también nos invita y nos exige a defenderlos ya en los territorios, sobre todo, donde el capitalismo, que está más voraz que nunca, literalmente está llevándonos hacia una época, una crisis civilizatoria que no tiene comparación alguna. En ese sentido y en ese contexto, existe un nivel de criminalización altísimo a defensores y defensoras de derechos de la naturaleza. Solo viendo las cifras de Colombia, las cifras de Brasil y las cifras de México, es para quedarnos completamente locas y locos. Y no podemos permitir que esas cifras se repliquen en otros países, porque justamente los ejercicios de defensa de los derechos de la naturaleza, de los territorios, son esenciales en cada uno de los estados y de los países de los que pertenecemos. Mi pregunta y mi participación va en el sentido de que tal vez deberíamos enfocarnos también en esa dirección, en crear una articulación a nivel global que nos permita defender a los defensores y a las defensoras de derechos de la naturaleza en cada uno de nuestros territorios e ir un poquito más allá del debate intelectual de los derechos de la naturaleza. Eso sí. Gracias.
Thank you so much for bringing up that important concept, and I think a lot of us fully agree with you. As I mentioned earlier in my comments, one of the things that we've done at the tribunals is to really highlight land defenders, because there's been, like when we go to the UN climate talks, there's no space for them to visibilize their struggles. So one of the things we're doing is educating people by ensuring that those cases are heard, and I think it's been very helpful to some of the people engaged. So that's just like a practical small thing we're doing. But the larger question you bring forward, I don't think any of us could agree with you more, is how do we move from the work that we've been doing at GARN, this is one of the reasons we're convening, so that there is real-time action on the ground. Many of us are involved, as an example, in my organization, we're involved with women on the front lines of climate change. We're in the streets, we're in the fields, we're getting arrested, we're there. So, we're in the movement all the way, and what does that mean for the rights of nature movement right now, I think is a big question. And I just want to congratulate you, because I see, the youth and that youth pushing us to do more, to be more active, and I just want you to know that we are with you, and we also want that. And how we navigate the rights of nature movement into more of a frontline struggle is a big question that we're wrestling with, so thank you for presenting that, and know that we are with you in spirit, and that's a very important issue, obviously, as climate change increases, more land defenders are killed, it couldn't be more urgent, so thank you for bringing forward the urgency issue.
I would just add really quickly that for all of the members of the Global Alliance, most of us are either grassroots organizations or working to defend and empower grassroots communities, indigenous communities, forest communities, frontline communities. So the work of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature is also to make sure that we have a platform to strengthen all of those struggles. So the Global Alliance doesn't work without the work of all of the individual organizations. And likewise, we think that it's important to elevate this platform to strengthen our work, because for each of us on this panel and for everyone around the Global Alliance, the people we are responsible to are the people on the ground only.
It's a good question, and it's something that all of us have to also respond to, because it bears upon the responsibility that we have, especially when we're looking at this critical junction when we're talking about systemic change. It's been mentioned many times today, changing a system. And I know firsthand many times of what this involves. I was there in Standing Rock. Our people were there in Standing Rock. We have relatives and people that were there that were criminalized. I knew Berta from Honduras. So we do have this problem, and it will continue as we take on the system. And the system will resist us. They will fight us because they're holding on, and part of that system is capitalism. They're holding on, and they will do anything to maintain control, to move from a fossil fuel economy, for an example, into a living economy. That's very challenging to the system. I call it the matrix. It will do everything it can to sabotage our work, to come in and create divisions so that we are fighting against each other. But also this issue of not only the harassment and criminalization that's taken place, but also assassinations. Very important. So there's mechanisms that are there to address these issues, but it's a long process in the UN mechanism. So we have to use other tools, for example, social media, and we have to get the information out immediately. I mean, one of the things that we could talk about is what is the platform for exchange and communication, a rapid response, having a rapid response process to where we hear something happening, it goes global, so that we can get those people who are criminalized, assassinated, threatened, we can get the information out. Thank you.